Room 442 is brought to you by North Star Bets. That's a win.
Hello and welcome into Room 442. Let's talk some TFC. I'm Sarah Pararia, joined with, of course, Mikey Singh. And Mikey, it's been a bit of a strange week for TFC after kind of the fallout of Austin last weekend.
Yeah, you know, this part of the MLS season is usually a bit dull. You're in May, you're in between transfer windows, you're at a point of the year where, you know, points aren't at a premium. So games aren't, I don't want to say meaningless, but, you know, they don't mean as much as the beginning and ends of the year. You know, that fresh feel of a new team, that's all gone already. But with TFC, I mean, it seems like things are flying all over the place, and there's plenty to talk about.
Well, let's talk about an article that you actually found from a good friend of yours, Neil Davidson.
Yeah, shout out Neil.
Shout out Neil. He spoke to Bob Bradley on Tuesday after the weekend, and here's something Bob Bradley had to say regarding the entire Federico Bernardeschi incident. Fede was wrong for speaking that way after the game. It was a tough loss, a late goal after we had defended in a really good way. So he was wrong to speak that way after the game, 100%, and we've now discussed it inside the team. So I made it clear that that was out of line. Of course, Bernardeschi, after that Austin game, came out and said that he was frustrated, he was worried about the antics and the tactics that TFC were, you know, using, and basically just not playing great football, targeting one Bob Bradley.
Called for a change.
Yeah, exactly. So this is, I guess, what Bob has to say after this. Do you think that, I mean, we kind of spoke about this on Tuesday, but we both agreed that Bernardeschi wasn't necessarily out of line and he had every right to come out and say what he felt like he needed to say.
Yeah, so I guess first I'll say I do understand Bob's line of thinking here. As the manager of the team, you want to keep your guys going in general. I want to say in a good way, but just keep them going through what is obviously a really difficult stretch when obviously results, but also injuries. And I think one of the things he touches on in the article is that he also understands the frustration among the fan base, frustration among the players. There's a lot of frustration right now in TFC. So Bernardeschi coming out and talking to media, venting his frustration, it only adds fuel to the fire that is already existing within Toronto FC. So I get Bob Bradley's side of that. But at the same time, I also hate it because Bob's essentially saying you can't come speak to media and tell media how you're actually feeling. And there's so much, not just in soccer, I think just in professional sports in general, there's a lot of that missing. There's a lot of that authenticity missing when players come and talk to media. They're so trained nowadays. They're so rehearsed nowadays. You can almost at times predict what, you know, players are going to say when you ask them certain questions because we've just seen it over and over again. Again, you'd love players who come out and they tell you how they actually feel. And that's part of the reason why TFC fans love Bernardeschi so much, is because you can tell he wears his heart on his sleeve every single time he speaks to media or speaks to fans. Like, you can tell it's really authentic, and that's what, you know, comes across in his interviews. So I hate that part of it. I hate how he's almost stripping that away from Bernardeschi by saying he made it clear that, you know, that can't happen. But I guess I understand it. It's frustrating.
Trying to clean up the mess a little bit as well, right? He also referenced Bernardeschi along with Lorenzo Insigne. First of all, Insigne, there were rumors floating around all weekend on what was going on with him, and Bob Bradley came out and cleared that up, basically saying he had some tightness in his lower body midweek after the New York Red Bull game, and then it ended up being he had to go get an x-ray and get checked out, and wasn't deemed fit to play, so he didn't travel for that game. But yeah, we all know there were a ton of rumors going around. But overall, with Insigne and Bernardeschi, it's kind of been coming about that they're not living up to what they were paid for, what was expected of them. And Bob Bradley even said this as well to Neil. He said, I said this a few times, that a huge part of my responsibility is to get the best out of those two. I've also said we're not where we need to be. The record's not good enough. We've left points on the table. And as you know, I always take full responsibility. So the idea of how to take more out of them, yeah, that's work every day. Yeah, it's pretty difficult. I feel like Bernardeschi started off the season a lot stronger, a lot more prominent. Maybe he's fallen off a bit, but I still think the focus should shift to Insigne, because I think with Bernardeschi, I feel like he's at least trying and he's playing those 90 minutes. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say it falls on both of them. And also, I think, as Bob said, I think it absolutely falls on Bob Bradley. Like we had this discussion, I think, last week or a week before that. Bob's job is to get the best out of both Insigne and Bernardeschi. This team is not going to be successful if both of these guys are not going. So Bob has to do a better job of finding ways to get the most out of these guys. And a coach can also only do so much, right? The players as well, they need to step up and they need to, start living up to their expectations if this is going to be successful. Maybe those expectations might have been a bit too high to begin with. Maybe Lorenzo Insigne won't be the guy, the one player that, saves Toronto FC. But at the same time, like, he's fallen well below those expectations. Bernardeschi in his last, I think, 7 games, he doesn't have a goal and assist in all competitions. So, he's dropped off a little bit. Can we chalk that up to the fact that, they're not being surrounded by players that can get the best out of them? Maybe that's part of the reasoning, because one of the things we've talked about is that in order to get the best out of Insigne and Bernardeschi, you need to surround them with other players who are really good on the ball and they can trust their teammates a little bit more, where, you see them playing with a lot of young, inexperienced players, different players every week because of all the injury problems. Maybe that's like adding up to this, but yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to actually say, do you think that's a bit more of an issue that should be looked at? Because when we talk about Insigne and Bernardeschi, we're talking about 2 Italian national team players playing for the likes of Juventus and Napoli. And when they were fit, they were starting those games. I know the comparison right now is going to be, well, what about Seba? Let's be honest, Seba was a bench player for Juventus. He was not on the same level. Now, was he a way better player for TFC? Of course he was. There's no competition there. But I'm just wondering if for them, they were coming from one of the top 5 leagues in Europe, playing on an Italian national team, to then coming and playing at TSC. Like, it is such a massive difference. I'm not giving them the benefit of the doubt. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate a bit and just think, like, this must be such an adjustment for them as well, because maybe they're making passes or making runs and then the other players are just not comprehending what they're doing.
Yeah.
And,
Like, the question is, like, does TFC have to elevate their game around them, or do these guys maybe have to almost dumb their game down a little bit, or, to get the best out of the rest of their teammates? Like, maybe the level that they're thinking on is just so high that players around them in MLS just can't, understand which type of run to make to get, on the end of what they're seeing, or, whether to come short or whether to go long, what they're exact, you know what I mean? Like, just get on the same page of both of those players. So it is an adjustment that both of these guys have to make. I'm sure it is a bit of a shock. I'm thinking at this point, they both would have expected that, TFC would be a lot better than they are, but yeah, that's just not the case.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of just communication issues across the board at TFC. But let's take a look at who they're facing this weekend on Saturday at BMO Field. And that is DC United, Wayne Rooney's DC United. So DC are now 6th place. Their record stands at 5-4-5. Started off the season, this was TFC's first game. We know this game too well. They could have gotten a point out of it. They lost in the end. After that, DC went on and had a few losses, but since then have been relatively consistent. They lose a game, but then they bounce back with a couple draws or a win. And something Wayne Rooney said, actually, because they just faced LA Galaxy and smashed them 3-0. After that game, he said, the mentality on the pitch with these guys is really good, because they know no matter what, if it's late in the end of a game, they can still come back and win it, which to me, I'm sitting here thinking, talking about TFC week in and week out, I was like, that is a scary mentality for TFC to go and face, because that's basically such an issue TFC have. They can't finish those games out. Why do you think we've seen so many draws? So what do you think Bob Bradley and the boys in red are thinking going into this game? Because it's not going to be easy.
No, it's not. I still think it's a game that 3 points could be on the table here. Now, DC have done such a terrific job of getting the best out of their star player, and that's Christian Benteke, of course. They like to suck teams in and, draw teams into their press, and then all of a sudden kick it long to Benteke, and they've found a recipe out of that. It's working for them. Also, Matthias Klick and Lewis O'Brien, 2 other guys who are experienced in Europe, they're doing a really good job of that too. So TFC, it's not going to be easy, as you said. They're in form right now, but they're TFC need a response at home, right? That's the big thing. They're at home. They're at BMO Field. Fans are frustrated. They need some sort of response. It seems like they're getting a little bit healthier, but they still need to find a way to take that next step and just go through this turbulent time. Yeah.
Before we just jump into the injury list, because I want to go over that again, what do you think the atmosphere is going to be like at BMO Field? Because I know you were kind of mentioning earlier in the week that you're expecting a lot of boos from the fans.
Yeah, the tension's high. It's been high for a little bit. And now coming off a week against Austin, come off a week where Federico Bernardeschi, the fans' beloved player, makes those comments, it's going to be even higher. I think pregame, you'll probably see a little bit of frustration being vented from fans, and we'll see what kind of response TFC give, because it's easy to buckle down in those types of moments, especially when it seems like your fan base isn't really behind you. But if they come out, they show some fight, they find a way to start really strong, then maybe the fans will be able to grow into the game. But yeah, I'm expecting a pretty tense atmosphere at BMO Field.
I bet. Okay, quickly, injury list. We know Insigne was training back on Tuesday after his little injury pickup. So we'll expect him to, unless out of nowhere again, something just pops up. But we should expect Lorenzo Insigne to be making his appearance on Saturday. Out of that, 10-man injury list we saw last week, is there anyone else that's maybe or is back?
Yeah, so Jaquil Marshall-Ruddy will be back. Obviously, he served his 2-game suspension, so he's another guy that you could either start or bring off the bench that can potentially give you some valuable minutes. We'll see. I'm going to speak to Bob Bradley tomorrow, and we'll get a more concise update. Matt Hedges was obviously back. DeAndre Kerr was back in training, so he went through concussion protocol, missed the one match, and potentially could be available on Saturday as well. Other guys, Shane O'Neill's making some progress. Sigurd Rosted, I still think he's a little bit away, but he was on the field doing some work by himself. Jordan Perusa might be available, so it's getting smaller. It's getting smaller, but still, you're missing some key guys, and Michael Bradley, Alonso Coelho, Jonathan Osorio, Victor Vasquez. Those guys are going to be out for a good amount of time. So, yeah, it still won't be easy.
Yeah. All right. Well, if a team ever needs a comeback, now is the time for TFC. They're taking on DC United May 27th, 7:30 p.m. at BMO Field.
Room 442 is brought to you by North Star Bets. That's a win.